She sang softly in a corner of the bar, cleaning the tables with wet eyes and her voice muffled by the loud chatter of the customers. When she tripped and dropped a tray of glasses, the entire bar went silent for a moment. But his laughter cut through the air, loud, cruel, accompanied by slow clapping. "Besides being clumsy, you want to be a singer? That thin voice doesn't even move a sleeping child," said Arthur Delgado, heir to a multi-million-dollar record company, sitting with his millionaire friends at the central table. They laughed out loud, filming the scene. The girl picked up the shards of glass with trembling fingers, in silence. A tear ran down her face, but she wiped it away with her shoulder, like someone who was used to bleeding in public. The manager didn't defend her, the customers fell silent. And he, the man who set trends in the music industry, turned his back, as if she were nothing more than noise. That night, the world laughed with him. The next day, he didn't laugh anymore. In the imported car, stopped in traffic with the windows closed, Arthur impatiently flipped through the radio channels, searching for something he couldn't explain. And then he heard it. The same voice. That fine voice that he had publicly humiliated, now filled the car with a melody so raw and painful that it made his hardened chest tremble. The announcer announced, "This is the revelation of the week, Aurora Mendez, discovered by an independent producer after singing in secret in nightclubs. Her story of overcoming has moved the country." Arthur froze. The name, the voice, everything resonated. He recognized every note, every tremor, every word he had despised. The same tone that he had laughed at was now on the front pages of newspapers and a trending topic on all social networks. And then, without anyone saying anything, he realized the joke was over. And now the shame was his alone. That night at the Ravel bar, in the old city center, was no different from so many others. Wooden tables stained with beer, crooked chairs, hurried waiters, and yellowish lights that created an almost theatrical atmosphere. It was a place where the rich pretended to enjoy bohemian life, and the poor pretended not to notice the looks from above. Between laughter and toasts, Arthur's group took over the brightest table. Well-ironed shirts, watches that cost twice the rent of any employee there, cell phones turned upside down, ready to record the world as their stage. Arthur was the center, the kind of man who didn't ask for silence, and he imposed it just by his presence. Tall, with a practiced smile, eyes that didn't look, but judged. His friends followed him in everything. If he found something funny, everyone laughed. If he ignored someone, everyone looked away. And that night, he found Aurora funny. The sound of the glass breaking was the trigger. Aurora tried to hide it, but her hand was bleeding. Still, she knelt down and began to pick up the pieces. She didn't want to be noticed. She just wanted to go unnoticed, finish her shift and go home. But Arthur wanted a show. He was the one who brought up the subject. "Sing for us, Tray Lady. Show us that voice you think you have." She looked up, still on her knees, and for a second their eyes met. A second that said nothing to him, but burned inside her. "Go on. Sing. It's free. Consider it part of the payment for the glass." The group laughed. One of the friends began to film discreetly. Aurora hesitated. With a trembling voice, she whispered the first notes of an old song from her childhood. She didn't finish the second sentence. The laughter overlapped. "Stop, stop, stop. Is that music? It sounds like a chicken with a cold." The bar exploded in laughter. She fell silent, picked up the last pieces, and went back to the bar. She didn't cry there. She didn't answer. She just served another table with her head down. Arthur went on with the night as if nothing had happened. For him, the humiliation was a bad joke. For her, it was just another scar. But that same night, when the last glasses were washed and the bar was empty, Aurora was left alone on the improvised stage. She picked up the microphone and, so that no one could hear, sang. With her eyes closed, the pain transformed each note into something that would never fit on a cell phone camera or in the laughter of a millionaire. She didn't know that fate had already pressed play, and that on the other side of the city, someone had heard it, and recorded it. Aurora never had a stage, but she always had silence. Silence at the dinner table where no one spoke to anyone. Silence in the room she shared with her grandmother, where the only sound was the tired breathing of the woman who raised her alone after her parents disappeared from the map, each one going their own way, as if running away was the only inheritance she had left. Ever since she was little, she knew she needed to be invisible to survive. As a child, she would spend her afternoons under the stairs of the building, with her broken headphones and her hand on her chest, feeling each beat of the music as if it could heal the emptiness. And she sang. Without an audience, without a singing school, without encouragement. She just sang. Her grandmother, Donna Azalea, was her only listener, and even when she could no longer hear, even when age was robbing her of her lucidity, she would say tenderly, "You have a voice that heals the soul, girl. Only the world has not seen it yet." But the world never had time to see it. Aurora grew up piling up losses. Her grandmother's death was silent and cold, like everything else life had thrown at her. At 17, she was alone, with a borrowed guitar, overdue bills, and no chance. With each job she lost, she became more afraid. And with each bar she agreed to work as a cleaner or waiter, she followed the same routine. She would enter silently, leave silently, and if she had time left, she would sing to the bathroom walls before leaving. That was enough. Music was her prayer, her refuge, her way of existing when no one else seemed to notice that she was still breathing. There were no luxuries, no promises. Just the silent hope that one day someone would listen, not out of pity, but because they needed it as much as she did. When she found the job at Bar Revel, Aurora was already used to the looks of contempt. But there was something about that place, maybe the abandoned stage, maybe the muffled acoustics, maybe just the desire not to die forgotten, that made her stay. Every day after work she would wait until the last employee left. She would turn on the broken microphone and sing in the dark, like someone lighting a candle in a cemetery. She sang for her grandmother. She sang for herself. She sang so she wouldn't disappear. And so, in one of those solitary rehearsals, a forgotten client heard, recorded, and sent the audio to a musician friend. Without her knowing, her pain had already begun to penetrate the concrete. But on that specific night, the night of Arthur's cruel laughter, what hurt wasn't the public humiliation, but what she felt inside. It was as if his contempt had torn apart something she had spent years building. And what was left was the echo of a wounded but still living voice. And this echo, without Arthur knowing, was about to become a sound in every corner of the country. It was the birthday of one of the record company's partners. And as usual, Arthur made a point of turning any celebration into a private spectacle of ostentation and mockery. That night, the group had chosen Bar Revel out of pure irony, a decadent place, hidden away in the old city center, with a reputation for being authentic. The kind of place where the rich used to feel human for a night, before returning to their apartments with a view of the skyline. Arthur was bored, surrounded by the same old faces, expensive glasses and bought smiles. The whiskey no longer burned as it used to, and the comments about contracts and artists from the record company no longer made him feel important. It was then that one of his friends, Gabriel, nudged his arm and discreetly pointed to the young waitress, who was discreetly cleaning the tables. "That one sings, they say. I heard the security guard say yesterday that she waits for the bar to empty and sings alone on stage." Arthur raised an eyebrow, his smile crooked. "That one over there?" He laughed shortly. "Can you sing?" And then, with a mischievous glint in her eyes, she had the idea that would change everything. "Let's make a bet." The others leaned in, excited. 500 Rs each. I'll make her sing here right now. And if it's halfway bearable, I'll pay double. And if it's horrible? One of them asked, already anticipating the answer. Then you film it and we'll make it viral. The singer from the bar who made the country out of tune. She'll make more money than any new artist. The laughter echoed. The bet was made. And Arthur stood up, walking with the cruel confidence of someone who always wins. He approached Aurora with the false charm he used to seduce journalists and investors. She glanced at him, not understanding. "You can sing, right?" She hesitated. "Who said that?" "It doesn't matter. I want to hear it. Here. Now." The silence that formed was worse than any insult. Everyone stopped. Everyone looked. The humiliation was not due to the words, but to the context, by the intention, by the laughter in his eyes. She knew it wasn't an invitation, it was a weapon. "Please no." "Oh, so it's true. He sings, but only when there's no one there. What a shame." He turned his back. Another bathroom singer. His friends laughed, but she, without understanding why, felt her feet move on their own. He climbed onto the small stage and picked up the disconnected microphone. Her voice came out shaky. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. Her hands were cold. But the first note broke the silence. For a moment there was a pause, a real pause. But Arthur shook his head and started laughing. No, sorry. This is too bad." Aurora stopped singing. The laughter grew louder. One of her friends was recording with his cell phone. She got off the stage with her face burning, trying to hold the tray with her shaking hands. But she tripped, and the sound of the glass breaking was the signal for more laughter. That's how she became a joke. A meme before she became an artist. A humiliation that didn't need a caption. And Arthur? Arthur returned to the table with each friend's 500 Rs in hand, and the certainty that he had won once again. The next morning began like so many others for Aurora, with sore feet, an empty stomach, and a heavy head from everything she couldn't forget. But something in the air was different. It wasn't hope yet. It was just the discomfort of someone who senses that the world has turned a little, even without warning. She crossed the, square in front of the terminal, as she did every day, and entered the small improvised recording studio where a friend of her late grandmother, a simple man, a retired sound technician, insisted on recording her voice ever since he had overheard her one night on the empty stage. That morning his face was more serious than usual. "Aurora, your audio was leaked. But calm down. It was different than you imagine." She froze. She thought the video of her humiliation had been spread. She thought everyone would be laughing at her, but he continued. "Someone sent me your recording from yesterday, and I passed it on to a friend at the community radio station. They played it this morning, and the listeners, they asked for a replay." Aurora's eyes widened. "What? You went on the air, Aurora? On the radio? And people are calling." She sat there speechless. It was unreal. The same voice that had been ridiculed just a few hours earlier was now gaining strength over the speakers. The same melody that he had stopped was now crossing neighborhoods. And at the same moment on the other side of the city, Arthur almost crashed his car. The melody echoed inside the vehicle with a disconcerting force. He couldn't change the station. Something was holding him there, in that voice. It was as if the sound was poking at an old memory he didn't know he had. When the song ended, he heard the name. Aurora Mendez, a talent recently discovered on the streets, a pure and cutting voice. The name sounded like a slap in the face. He parked. He picked up his cell phone. He started searching. And there, for the first time, he saw her for real. A simple photo on the radio's website, accompanied by a small text. Former waitress who moved listeners with an original song about loss and survival. Arthur stood still. For some reason that hurt. It wasn't remorse, not yet. It was discomfort. Because even though he had laughed at her, something inside him couldn't laugh now. At the end of the day, with his eyes still trying to understand what he felt, he appeared at the bar again. Alone. He wore the same arrogance, but his eyes were searching for something else. She was there, collecting glasses, avoiding his gaze. He approached. "You were on the air. I heard your voice today." She stopped. She didn't say anything. She just kept cleaning the table. "I want to make you a proposal." She raised her eyes slowly, firmly, as if she had bled too much to bow again. "Are you going to film me? Again?" He felt the weight of the words. He swallowed hard. "No, I'm thinking about helping you. I have contacts." She stared. Long. "You didn't hear anything, Arthur? And it's not because you can't. It's because you don't know how to listen." He didn't answer. For the first time, he wasn't the center of the scene. And for the first time, she pulled away before he said the last word. 2 days later, the video of the night of the humiliation leaked. It wasn't the recording of the song that was played on the radio. It was the other one. The one that one of Arthur's friends made in secret while she sang, shaking with embarrassment, before dropping the tray. Someone posted it in a private group, and within hours, the clip reached a humor page with millions of followers. The headline was cruel. "When the waitress thinks she's a diva." The frozen image of Aurora's face at the moment of the booing became a meme. At first, it was ridiculed. Laughter, comments, likes. People saying it was the new trend for out-of-tune singers. But something started to change when comments from radio listeners started to appear there. People said, "That's the same girl from the song on the radio on Tuesday. It's not possible." Others confirmed, "Yes, it is her. The voice is the same." And then, the contrast began to burn. The radio video, with Aurora's pure, emotional voice, started to circulate alongside the video from the bar. People were starting to understand what had really happened. It wasn't a bad performance, it was an ambush, it was a setup for humiliation. And the comments started to turn. She wasn't out of tune, she was scared. "Look at the way he talks to her. That's an abuse of power. And this guy over there laughing at her, who is he again?" Arthur's name started to come up more than he wanted. And not in the way I liked. Up until that point, he thought he could control the narrative, like he did with the artists on his label. But the internet has its own judgment. And he was being judged. At the same bar, 2 days after the video went viral, Arthur showed up with his leather jacket, the sunglasses he wore even at night, and the intention of reversing everything. Aurora was at the bar, talking to a local reporter who wanted to know more about the voice of the people. The bar was busier than usual. People had come there just to see her. When Arthur walked in, the atmosphere froze. The tables stopped talking. He walked up to the bar and said loudly, "Aurora, I want to apologize and extend an invitation. I have a bigger stage for you, a contract." But it wasn't a sincere request. It was an act. It was a strategy. The camera of one of the event's photographers was pointed at the two of them. She looked at the group, then back at him. Then she picked up the microphone, turned it on, and said, "You're not listening to me, Arthur. You're using me. Again." The entire bar listened. There was an uncomfortable silence. And then, as if it were part of a script the world had been waiting for, she turned to the audience. "I'm not the joke you tried to make, I'm the song you tried to shut down." Timid applause began. Then louder. Arthur tried to say something, but it was drowned out. He, who had always had the last word, was now just a man with a microphone turned off in his hands. And for the first time, he felt what it was like to be ignored in public. Like a noise. Like a note out of tune. The morning after the night of the confrontation at the bar, Aurora didn't show up for work, or to sing, or to answer the dozens of messages that flooded her cell phone, from journalists, listeners, and ordinary people who said they had cried while listening to her song. She retreated into herself, as she always did when something hurt her deeply. But this time it wasn't pain. It was a decision, a chosen silence. Alone in the small rented room with the musty smell and jammed windows, she mentally reviewed every detail of the last 48 hours. She no longer needed to scream to be heard. And that was when she decided to write a letter. A direct, emotional text without screaming, but with the precision of someone who knows exactly where the wound is. He posted it on his own social network, with an old photo of his grandmother holding his childhood guitar. The text began like this. "I knew. From the first glance I knew that it wasn't an invitation. It was a trap. And yet, I sang. Because I learned to sing even when the world screams for me to be quiet. And she continued without anger but firmly. Yes, I saw the laughter. I saw the cell phones recording. I saw the contempt. But what no one saw was the pain that I turned into music all these years. What no one saw was the hunger that I overcame with faith. What no one saw was my grandmother saying, "Sing, my daughter, because one day heaven will hear you." The text was shared thousands of times in just a few hours, not because of the controversy, but because of the truth, because of the vulnerability, because of the human details that don't fit into jokes. She didn't mention Arthur's name once, and that was exactly what hurt him the most. Because by not mentioning him, she diminished him. She took away his protagonism. He wasn't the villain. He was just another person in the way. Arthur read the text sitting in his office where the windows couldn't filter the storm that was beginning to form inside him. For the first time, he felt what it was like to be exposed without having control. For the first time, he understood that silence also speaks, and speaks loudly. He tried to respond with another post. She tried to offer a contract. She tried to minimize it. But it all sounded empty in the face of her truth. At the end of the letter, Aurora said, "I don't hold a grudge. I just don't have any more room to repeat the same mistakes. I sing for those who want to listen, and for those who feel, those who don't feel, can go their own way." And that's how, without shouting, without direct confrontation, without the camera on, Aurora gave her answer. Without raising her voice, she raised her own name. And by doing so, she silenced everyone who still thought they could use her as a stage for their jokes. Arthur couldn't sleep. He spent the early hours of the morning in front of the huge vinyl record rack in his penthouse apartment, swirling glasses of whiskey that didn't warm anything else. The city, seen from above, seemed too silent for the noise he carried inside. And it was on one of those nights that something pulled him back to the past. A name, a detail, an echo that emerged as he read Aurora's letter for the 100th time. My grandmother used to say, "Sing, my daughter, because one day heaven will hear you." That phrase sounded all too familiar. He didn't know why, but the word stirred a dormant memory. He picked up the phone, called his assistant, and demanded a full report on Aurora Mendez. Name, background, relatives, old records, everything. Hours later, the dossier arrived, and amidst dozens of common pieces of information, one name stood out: Zalia Mendez, the grandmother. Zalia was known in the 1980s as the musician's seamstress. There was a small studio in the basement of a building where new bands rehearsed. But what caught Arthur's attention was a photo. An old, weathered, black and white image of Aurora's grandmother sewing the first leather jacket that her own father, a legendary music producer from the faux 90s, wore in his public debut. It was her, the same woman who had once saved Arthur's father's reputation by repairing, on the eve of a televised concert, the torn costume that no one else wanted to wear. There was even a handwritten thank you letter from his father. He recognized it immediately. It was kept framed in the family office, but he had never cared about the name at the bottom. Zalia Mendez. She had helped his father at the beginning of his career, and now, so many years later, the son was humiliating the granddaughter of that same woman in public. Arthur felt his blood run cold. Suddenly, everything made sense. Her voice, her strength, her silent dignity. It was as if fate was collecting an old debt, throwing him to his knees before a story he had ignored. She was no ordinary person. She was the product of someone who had once supported his own family. He remembered crossing paths with Zalia when he was still young, running through the backstage of a recording session, and how she had stopped him from falling down a ladder with a firm hug. "You need to learn to listen, boy. The ground also speaks." Those words came like a slap in the face. Aurora was more than talent. She was a broken link between the past and the present. And now he knew. His laughter had cost him dearly. It had cost him a memory that time now demanded back. Aurora was not just the girl he had made cry. She was a mirror of what he had lost. The connection with everything that really mattered. The Apartment was quieter than ever. The meetings at the record company began to lose their rhythm. Arthur's easy laugh, which used to liven up crowded houses of businessmen and artists, now sounded forced even to himself. Sitting in his leather armchair, with Aurora's dossier in his hands and her voice echoing in his memory like an unforgettable prayer, he tried to find a way to undo what had already been seen, commented on, and judged. But she had disappeared. She didn't answer messages. She didn't post anything anymore. She canceled interviews, turned down offers from bigger radio stations, and turned off the number that was in her social media bio. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air, like mist, and the more she disappeared, the more present she became. It was the absence that weighed, an absence unlike anything he had ever felt, because it wasn't rejection, it was silence. A silence that said more than any answer, a silence that demanded listening. Arthur began to walk in, places he had never set foot in before. He visited the neighborhood where Aurora grew up, went into simple bakeries where her name was whispered fondly, as if it were someone from the house. He felt small. People loved her for reasons he had never understood. Not because of fame, not because of a contract, not because of prestige, but because her pain was visible, and her strength silent. At every corner he heard new stories about her. The time he sang to calm a woman in crisis at the bus. Stop. The time he improvised a borrowed guitar to liven up a charity fair. Small gestures that together formed a picture of someone whole, even if broken. She was not a celebrity. She was a symbol. And he was now just a noise in the midst of all this. He tried to find her in the improvised studio where he recorded his first song, but it was empty, locked, as if time had also gone. He tried to talk to the community radio station, but all he heard was, "She asked for some time. She said she needed to breathe away from the noise." Arthur started listening to her music every morning. The same song, over and over. Only now, each verse hurt him differently. It wasn't just guilt. It was a lack that couldn't be justified. He started writing. I really didn't know why. Maybe because for the first time I wanted to say something without the weight of arrogance. I wanted her to know that he hadn't just listened. He was listening now. But she wasn't there to read it. And that hurt more than any criticism from the press. At the height of her fame, Aurora disappeared. And at the height of Arthur's loneliness, she became a constant presence. Not at parties, not on the radio, but inside him. Where vanity doesn't reach. Where regret becomes a voice. The media, which had previously treated Arthur Delgado as a music industry prodigy, now observed him with the same acid curiosity, reserved for those who fall from their pedestal. The articles began discreetly, with an analytical tone about the episode in the bar that sparked debates about power and public humiliation. But the tone soon changed. Opinion columns appeared with cutting titles. The man who tried to silence a voice and ended up swallowed by it. From luxury to shame. Arthur and the Aurora Mendez case. The pressure grew like an unending wave. Celebrities who had previously flattered him now preferred not to mention him. Artists signed to his record label began to break contracts or publicly request their resignation, claiming ethical incompatibility. On social media, hashtags demanded a boycott of his events. Old videos of him mocking artists on live streams or treating employees with disdain resurfaced like ghosts. What had previously been seen as irreverence was now viewed with more attentive, more critical eyes. People were beginning to put the pieces together. The laughter, the contempt, the arrogance. It was all on replay. But now the audience had another reference point. Aurora. She had become a symbol of discreet resistance, of quiet dignity, of talent that flourishes even on rocky ground. And Arthur, who had always controlled narratives, now saw his story being told by others. At a benefit event organized by a music NGO, he tried to give a speech. But when he went on stage, he was greeted with a heavy silence. The applause came only for the artist who would perform after him. A young, visually impaired woman who, when thanking him for the award, made a point of, mentioning Aurora as an inspiration. Arthur tried to continue, but his voice failed. For the first time, he was not heard. That night in his apartment, he stared into the mirror with hollow eyes. He no longer recognized the man in front of him. The sunglasses, the meticulously combed hair, the tailored suit. It all seemed like a costume for a role that no longer fit him. He no longer knew what he was. And more deeply, he began to realize who he had never been. The fall was not a scandal. It was a sequence of silences, canceled invitations, unreturned calls, and most of all, the emptiness left by someone who chose not to be there to watch his fall. Aurora did not mock. She did not react. She did not need to. Because when the truth is profound, it does not need to shout. It simply remains. Arthur felt that there was no longer any ground where he had once walked with such confidence. And at the end of that week, he understood. He was no longer the man everyone wanted to applaud. He was the man everyone had learned to forget. Arthur began to walk aimlessly. The streets that he had previously only seen from inside his car with tinted windows now swallowed him up in slow, silent steps. He, who had once made noise his instrument of power, now heard the sounds of the city like never before. The murmur of people on the subway, the muffled crying of a mother in front of the hospital, the sincere laughter of a man selling used books on the sidewalk. And in every detail that he had previously ignored, he saw a piece of the pain that Aurora carried in silence. He began to visit community music institutions without announcing his name. He listened to young people with bright eyes and raw voices like hers, and understood how far he had strayed from the essence of what he claimed to love. Little by little, he began to listen more than he spoke, to take notes more than he posted, to question himself instead of showing off. For the first time, he looked for a place to be just. Someone, without a last name, without a title, without security. The luxury apartment was closed. He donated part of his collection of rare vinyl records to public music schools. The studio where he humiliated young artists was now used by young people without resources, sponsored anonymously. He knew that none of this would erase what he had done, but he did not do it expecting forgiveness. He did it because when he lost Aurora, he found something he had never had: truth. He looked for the letter from Zelia, Aurora's grandmother, in his father's office, and read it for the first time in complete silence. I don't sew to be seen. I sew to keep my dreams alive. The final sentence of the letter stayed in his mind for days. And then he understood that this was what Aurora had done all along. She did not sing for fame. She sang to keep herself from falling apart. Deep down, she had always been stronger than him, more whole. He began to write songs for the first time in his life. Not to release them, just to understand what pain could say. At night he would listen to her song again, but now with a notebook in hand, trying to translate into words what he had never known how to feel. Each verse was a mirror, and each mirror made him bleed. One rainy afternoon he returned to the Ravel bar. It was closed, undergoing renovations. A new owner would reopen the space as a cultural center. He left a letter on the door with no name, just an envelope with the words, I heard. Too late, perhaps, but I heard. Thank you for not shouting back at me. Your silence was my echo. Arthur was not looking for public redemption. He was just looking to reconnect with what he had always despised. And it was in this process that, without realizing it, his voice began to change. Not the voice he used in interviews or in business, but the inner one. The one he was finally learning to listen to before speaking. It was a winter afternoon that everything changed. The city was quieter than usual, as if even the wind respected the pause of something that needed to happen slowly. Arthur walked aimlessly, with an old notebook under his arm, the same one where he wrote down songs he had never shown to anyone. He went into a small bookstore in the Libertad neighborhood, not to buy anything, but because the smell of old pages always gave him the feeling that there was still time to start over. He ran his fingers along the worn spines until he heard a voice. A familiar, unmistakable voice, as if it came from within him. It wasn't music playing. It was her. She was there in a corner of the bookstore, sitting on a wooden bench with a child on her lap. Maybe the niece, maybe the daughter of someone close, telling a story with the same sweetness that she sang. She didn't see him right away, but he stopped, motionless, as if time had tied his feet to the ground. She seemed at peace. She had no makeup, no crowd, no stage, no spotlight. Just her, simple, whole, real. When she looked up and saw him, there was a silence between them that needed no caption. She didn't back away. She didn't even smile. She just watched him. And he, with his heart beating as if he were in front of an audience for the first time, approached slowly. He stopped 2 steps away. He didn't extend his hand. He didn't say hello. He just took out of his pocket the envelope with the letter he had left at the bar weeks before, the same one he never knew if she had read, and he handed it to her, with his eyes downcast. "Have you read it?" She nodded. Then she looked at the child next to her, who was now leafing through a children's book absent-mindedly. "Have you changed?" The question came calmly, without pressure. He took a deep breath. "I don't know if I have, but today I know how empty I was, and how much you filled me without even realizing it." She was silent for a few seconds, and then he asked, "Do you still need to listen to me to feel like someone?" The question hurt, but he didn't hesitate. "No. Today I need to hear you just because your voice makes me feel like a better person." And then for the first time she smiled. Small, discreet, but genuine. Like someone who recognizes a healed wound. Like someone who understands that some reunions are not to relive the past, but to honor everything that survived the silence. She didn't hug him. He didn't apologize again. They both just stood there, facing a new version of themselves, certain that life, when it wants to teach, doesn't shout. It just puts the right people in the same place at a time when the ego has already left, and the heart, finally, learned to listen. That same night, Arthur received a short message on his cell phone. There was no name, just a time and an address. It was a small theater, hidden between 2 narrow streets in the Bella Vista neighborhood, a place where independent musicians performed without sponsorship, without fame, just with courage and music in their souls. He went, not knowing what to expect, without security, without cameras, just him, his heart beating with an uneasiness that bordered on fear. When he entered, he realized that this was no ordinary show. The lights were low, the audience was small, and the atmosphere was more reminiscent of a ritual than a performance. Aurora was in the center of the stage, sitting on a wooden bench, with her guitar resting on her legs and her eyes focused on the floor. The audience applauded silently, as if even the applause had learned to respect her. She began to sing. It wasn't a song he knew. It was new to him, but the words seemed to have been written with pieces of the life they both lived in silence. It spoke of loss, of pride, of people who hurt because they don't know how to love. But above all, it was a song about rebirth. Arthur listened to each verse as if he were in front of a mirror. At the end, she didn't say thank you. She just looked at the audience and said, "Sometimes forgiving isn't forgetting. It's choosing to no longer carry what has already sunk us." And she left the stage. He remained, motionless, waiting for something. Minutes later, outside the theater, she appeared with the guitar on her back and a serene face. She stopped in front of him. "Why did you come?" he asked. "Because you needed to hear." She nodded slowly. "What you heard is not for you." "I know," he replied, "but it got through to me." She smiled, and then, without warning, she extended her hand, simple gesture. But for him, it was like a bridge thrown over an abyss of mistakes. He took it carefully and waited for something more. A sentence, an answer, an invitation. But she just said, "You gave me back what you tried to take away, My own voice. And she let go of his hand. She walked to the corner and turned without looking back. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't a new beginning. It was a choice. She chose to leave. Not with resentment, but with peace. Because she didn't need to stay any longer to prove that she deserved respect. She was respect itself. And for the first time, he knew that not all happy endings have to be together. Sometimes, true redemption is in seeing the other person leave in one piece, and knowing that, for once in your life, you didn't get in the way of their flight. Months later, a radio station in the countryside broadcast a special live performance by independent artists. The sound was clear, the voice firm, mature, serene. The announcer did not say the singer's name. She simply announced, "Now listen to the silent singing." In another corner of the city, at a used book stand, a man in a simple suit, no expensive watch, no hurry, was leafing through an old sheet music notebook. He chose a book with a worn cover and, when paying, left a small ribbon inside the back cover before handing it to the attendant. "For someone who needs to start over," he said with a half smile, before disappearing into the streets. In the abandoned theater, that is now a cultural center, there is a discreet painting on the back wall. It has no face, no gilded frame. Just a handwritten sentence. The loudest voice is the one that chooses when not to shout. And just below it, a simple signature, AM. The wind blows in through the half-open window and sends a forgotten score flying to the center of the empty stage. On it, a title scrawled in pencil. When even contempt learns to listen. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched something inside you. So tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven or would you have walked away like her? I really want to know what you would do in her place. And if this story touched you, leave a like now. It really helps the channel to continue bringing stories like this which speak straight to the heart. Take advantage and subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. In fact, the next one is already here on the screen waiting for you. Click now and come be moved again by another true story that will touch you.